What is up, Cubers? It's Andy here with my most requested video yet. That's right, I'm going through my EDC, my every draft cube stuff. First of all, you're going to need sleeves, and my subscribers will know that I always quad sleeve all my cubes. That's a KMC Perfect Heart inner sleeve, a regular Dragon Shield dual matte sleeve, a KMC matte outer, and then a plastic top loader for every single card. It's what you gotta do if you want to protect your cardboard. And don't forget, if you want to pick up any of this stuff, there'll be links down in the show description. Next up is dice, and bare minimum to every cube night, you know that I'm bringing a matching set of D4, D6, D8, D10, D12, and D20, both spin down and normal, of course, 6 dedicated +1/+1 counter die, 4 dedicated -1/-1 counter die, Planeswalker loyalty die, and of course, you know I got the Tarmogoyf die in the bag. Now for tracking life totals, one of the easiest EDC solutions is a leather-bound moleskin notebook with dot grid paper and a Lamy fountain pen. And yeah, you know I'm on that indigo ink. Now you're gonna need to time rounds, and for that I love to use my Rolex Submariner 1680 with the red Submariner text. That's right, the red subby. Now when the round starts, all you do is turn the dive bezel to the current time, and when the minute hand points to the 50 on the bezel, that's time in the round. These bare-bone essentials are what you need to run a successful draft. Now there's one last thing you gotta have, and I'm not gonna lie, it is the most difficult to source. It's 7 friends to play your cube with, and I have as of yet to find even one friend who wants to hang out and play Magic with me. If you're watching this video and you want to be my friend, please comment down below, and don't forget to like and subscribe and smash that bell icon.
Following the light.
Oh, hi everybody, and welcome to a brand new episode of Lucky Paper Radio. My name is Andy. I'm here as always with my co-host Anthony in the Toolmakers Ouroboros Maddox.
In the Toolmakers Ouroboros. Yes, they obviously, you call me this every week, so I understand what that means.
I was trying to think, is there a word? There has to be, somebody must have coined some thought technology surrounding fields of study or craft where you are capable of making your own tools with the material with which you work.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a big thing in a lot of creative projects. I know I've observed some people, a good friend of ours has done some woodworking, and it's like, okay, step 1, we got to build the jig to do the thing, and we make it out of wood.
A lot of jig making for carpenters.
I've done some ceramics, and it's like, okay, you're throwing a pot, but now you need to trim the pot. Well, let's throw a little chuck that you can put the pot in upside down so you can then trim it. What else? What other kinds of crafts do you know about? I feel like that does come up pretty often.
I think the peak of this is machinists. Like, machinists
oh, for sure, yeah,
are always just making the things to then make their machining shop better. I watch a couple YouTube channels of various engineers and blacksmiths and machinists, and they're always just like, for every video of them making something cool, blacksmiths for sure.
Yeah,
for every video of them making something cool, there are 4 videos of them fixing their shop up in some elaborate way to make the next cool thing.
Yeah, I actually was talking to a blacksmith a couple months ago, and they're like, yeah, here's all the tools. And also, I made all the tools because we have the tools. What do you start with? I don't know. It makes sense somehow.
I think the peak example of this, honestly, though, is software development.
Absolutely.
Like, when you get into software development and you start to realize the kind of tooling that exists in the text editor world, or if you go even further to, like, a language like Swift, which is entirely self-contained and has, like, its own development environment, the amount of time that has been spent making coding easier and better for people is insane, because if you're a computer programmer, you inherently know the texture of the material with which you work, which, I don't know, it reminds me of you with making cubes. That's where the nickname came from. But there should be a better word for that. I tried to Google it. I tried to figure it out. I mean, we should say, like, it doesn't apply to a lot of things, right? Like, it doesn't apply to, like, a weaver. You can't make a loom out of yarn. Like,
I bet there is a loom made of yarn out there. I'm imagining this just like thing that you just look at and you're like, that just looks like a pile of yarn. But then the person that knows how to use it is like, well, actually,
I actually think it kind of
lift
like
up this thread over here, and suddenly these 2 reams come apart, and I want to see the yarn loom now.
It probably could happen. I mean, even like ceramics, for the most part, you can't make your own tools. You can't make.
Yeah.
You're not going to throw a wooden tool or a potter's wheel.
I mean, it's just like how much can the tools that you need be made of the same materials or by the same process
Precisely.
as the process that you're making the product.
Yeah.
And with something like machining, as you're describing, it's like very much so.
Yeah.
You can really make a lot of the things that you need.
It's like, I sheared off this bolt. I will now make another bolt.
Yeah, ceramics a little bit, and then computer programming is at the total end of the spectrum of you can 100% make anything out of the code that other code can be made from. That makes sense.
There's a lot of
It's
layers of
you're
abstraction, though.
It's like you're in the Matrix, and everything is just made of code, except you're not in the Matrix. You're just looking at the Matrix because it's not real. The Matrix isn't real, folks.
Yeah, and the vast majority... Well, you don't know that for a fact. The vast majority of people that are writing code in a text editor, though, don't have the requisite knowledge to even come close to writing the
build
code,
the text editor that they're writing the code in.
Meanwhile, like, if you learn basic skills on a lathe and with a end mill, you can like see the path forward to making all of the parts of a complicated machine.
Sure. So
even if
code is both entirely this kind of thing, code is also just really complicated and hard to deal with. It actually, it kind of feels like the yarn loom. You're just like, yeah, here's all this code, but I can't like look at it and understand from a distance what it's like, but I'll pull at one line of code.
Exactly what it's like.
And you can kind of see how the parts eventually fit together, and you just try to untangle knots.
Man, we got to the yarn loom.
I'm going to have some deep anxiety dreams about the yarn loom tonight.
The yarn loom is such an important idea now to me. It's my new and most important idea. Anyway, Anthony, you have made a lot of tools for the Magic community, and specifically the cube design community, but especially just, broadly the community of nerds that are trying to work with large lists of cards or a bunch of metadata.
That is true. I mean, in addition to writing the code that makes the website and, a bunch of other stuff that we do with Lucky Paper, I also, to a man with JavaScript, everything looks like JavaScript.
A yarn loom.
And when your hobby is Magic, you end up with a bunch of lists of Magic cards around that you need to do stuff with. Like, I need to bulk upload these to the shop where I'm going to buy these cards, or I want to be able to compare two lists of cards, or I have a list of cards and I want to get the images so that I can use this in a page to be able to display these images, or I want to be able to print them out to do playtest cards. There's just all kinds of stuff you kind of want to do with lists of Magic cards, and as somebody who has access to the skills of programming, I do end up building a bunch of stuff to do with Magic cards.
I don't think most people would think of playing Magic in the way that you do. They wouldn't think, oh, I have to do a lot of stuff with lists of Magic cards. This would never occur to most people.
But I think that most people do.
Oh,
I mean,
for
and
sure.
you can also do a lot of these tasks just physically. Like, here's
That's
a stack of
what
cards
people do.
on your desk. It's like, this is my list of cards.
Yeah. This episode is about the tools of cube design, though. So we're going to be talking very practically about the specific tools that we use to design our cubes and how we use them. So especially if you're newer to cube design, you might get a sense for what it looks like to design and manage a cube.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there are two critical main ones that we're going to talk about, and then a couple other sort of secondary things, including maybe some of the things that I built. But those two big ones are Scryfall, which is a database of all the Magic cards that you can search, and Cube Cobra, which is sort of the premier kind of like universally accepted tool for managing cubes. So if you want to actually just organize your list of cards and do some common tasks with it, Cube Cobra is the place to go.
Yeah, if you are new to Cube and you just pop into the Cube subreddit, a Cube Discord, anywhere, and ask for feedback on a cube and post a list to anything other than Cube Cobra, the first thing you'll be told is put this in Cube Cobra before anybody's even going to look at it.
That's a really good reason to put it in Cube Cobra, because you will not get the conversation going past,
Nope.
why is this not on Cube
That would
Cobra?
be the only point to discuss.
Here's my Google Sheet. That's cool, but please put it in Cube Cobra.
We see you, Parnell. I have a couple other things, too, that I don't think are going to be on your list, but let's start with the
one
big
of them
ones.
Google Sheets? Because that is
No.
also on my list.
No, it's not. I mean, your rotisserie draft template is on my list, but
Sure, okay, that's on Google
that's
Sheets.
kind of a Google Sheet. Let's start with the big ones. I mean, we have talked on this podcast about Scryfall at length before. This is the most general purpose tool. If you are a Magic player at all, you probably know what Scryfall is, even if you're new to cube design. You also, Anthony, have written a number of articles that discuss ways in which you can use the advanced search or go a step further and even use regular expressions on Scryfall to help find lists of cards that might be interesting for your own cube designs. We can refer to those articles. How much do we really need to say about Scryfall? I don't think that much.
Every once in a while I meet somebody that doesn't know about it, and it's like, oh my god, guess what? Today is your day. And also, let me reference this XKCD about how exciting it is that you get to learn about this new thing. But, I mean, Scryfall is just an incredible, incredible resource, and it's honestly surprising to me that it exists, because it is just, like, built by people that wanted it to exist, and I think volunteer a lot of their time to make it work. And the quality of it is just really surprising in the scope of pieces of software. Scryfall is really excellent.
Yeah, I guess if there's a small chance that you're out there using something else right now, At first blush, if you are just like glancing at it, you might think, oh, this is the same as what I already use, right? I type in a search term and something pops up. Where Scryfall really exceeds is in all of the details and all of the small interactions and little thoughtful things they've done along the way that will really pay off when you are doing lots of detailed searches over and over again for a cube design. So if you've just, used Gatherer or something to like look up the Oracle text on a card
only the
before.
official one that the makers of the game use.
I forget which one I used to use before Scryfall existed. It was,
you probably used magiccards.info, which
that was it.
Actually, Scryfall kind of inherited that application. There's some lineage there.
They did coexist for a long time.
For a bit, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, if you're using one of those other card databases, you might think, oh, I can look a card up, it's all the same. But a big part of cube design is looking up cards you could possibly include in your cubes. I mean, we have a whole episode and article about how you can build a cube just from your collection, in which case there shouldn't be any scryfalling involved because you're just going to be looking at the cards physically in front of you. But if you are actually plumbing the depths of the many thousands of cards that exist in Magic, you're going to need tools to get through that pile, and Scryfall is the premier one.
Yeah, so just to be very explicit about this, Scryfall lets you search cards by name, which is really valuable if you're like, oh, I saw this card that somebody had, at FNM last week, and I'd like to put that in my cube. You can find that card. It also lets you search cards by any other text on the card. So if you think, oh, I want to find all the cards that reference goblins, or all the creatures that have at least 2 toughness, because I want to figure out what cards are going to be good if I have a bunch of shocks in my cube, anything like that, it lets you just do really, really complex searches by any of the fields in the card, and that's really, really valuable, especially when, if you're building a deck, you can imagine, here's my new commander deck, it cares about +1/+1 counters, I want to search for all the cards that reference +1/+1 counters. Same thing in a cube, you might have a couple different themes you're trying to bulk up, and you just want to be able to find all the cards that care about that. Scryfall will let you do that.
That's it. We can't talk anymore about Scryfall.
Okay, I want to say one more thing about Scryfall. The one other thing is, Scryfall also does have a deck builder on it, which is fairly limited, but it is really, really useful because it's so closely integrated with the great search functions, to the point that if you're on a desktop and you have an active list that you've created on Scryfall, you can then just hover over any card in the search results, hit the A key on your keyboard, and it'll add that card to a list. And this is a really, really great feature.
There's also a button you can click in the UI if you're not a hotkey person.
That's a great... I don't think about buttons. You just press the button that's right in front of you physically. And this is just a really great way to build up a list of cards. So especially if you're starting off a new cube, you don't necessarily have a list that's somewhere else yet. You're just sort of like gathering a bunch of cards based on a couple searches, like those kinds of themes that we mentioned. Just build a new deck, start adding a bunch of cards, and then you kind of have your clay with which to work on your next cube project built.
Yeah, I know this is essential to Bones' cube design process, one of the most prolific cube designers out there. And I think it's honestly maybe the best use for the deck list tool on Scryfall, because I got to say, I don't think it's particularly useful as a deck list
It's a little bit...
It is limited, and compared to something like Moxfield, which is like a full-featured, widely accepted, very easy to understand deck list editor with every feature you could ever dream of. I tried putting some deck lists on Scryfall and just ran into, I can't do this one thing. All of a sudden, all this work I put in to get this deck list in here is just wasted because now I have to go put it somewhere else. So I would say I think it's like the best use case for that feature, honestly.
I agree, and I use it that way pretty regularly.
All right, now we're done talking about Scryfall. I feel like we're scraping into like Morrow territory of starting so high level, which is good for people that are really new. But how many new people are going to find with this episode? I guess we'll find out. We'll see. If you found out about Scryfall from this episode, comment below, tweet at us, post on the subreddit. I don't know. Tell me somehow, because I really want to know if we're reaching anybody and the first ones to tell anybody about Scryfall. Should we talk about the snake?
Let's talk about Cube Cobra. So Cube Cobra is very different from Scryfall. This is the site where you're going to go to actually store and manage all of your cube lists. So once you have a list, maybe you created it initially in the site we're done mentioning, you can bulk import it into Cube Cobra, and it's different from a lot of other sites that are sort of tailored to be deck editors or deck managers, because a deck manager is going to do a lot of things like show you the mana curve and show you, stuff that's relevant to what you're doing when you're actually building a deck. Cube Cobra will instead give you a bunch of features to also analyze it in a way that you need to as a cube designer. So it has a bunch of features like being able to simulate drafts. So you can kind of like hard tests, like if I force this archetype, is that reasonable? Does this work? Do I find enough cards? You can filter through the list and get counts of different aspects. So if you're trying to, again, sort of like see how your different themes stack up in terms of number of cards, you can do stuff like that. It's also obviously just great that it makes it really easy to then share that list with somebody else, and somebody else can use those same playtest features to get a feel for your cube when you're trying to get feedback on it.
Yeah, the main thing it does is the primary view of your cube is just a much better way to look at a whole cube list. deck list editors are not designed to put 360, 540, 720 cards within a condensed, grokkable view. So that, I think, is the primary feature. And then, like you said, I think the next biggest feature for me that sets it apart from a Google spreadsheet or deck list editor is being able to simulate drafts, which I do a ton. How often do you actually use this feature yourself?
I used to use it more lately, not so much.
Is it just because you aren't designing anything actively? I mean, you have been designing something actively. I got a little hint to the other day.
I'm still more in the gathering cards mode. I don't have things that are complete to where it's balancing. But also, I mean, if I'm honest, I think I've designed a number of cubes we've actually built out in paper and play tested, so doing draft after draft doesn't necessarily give me a lot of information. And I'm also, as a player, just kind of in a mindset where I'm very happy right now to go into a draft pretty blind. If I was going to play a much more high-stakes cube event, then maybe doing some simulated drafts of the cubes that I was going to be playing might be more valuable to me.
Oh, I never simulate drafts from anybody else's cubes. I can't remember the last time I did that, and it would have been like a draft exchange situation where I was swapping with somebody else. I only simulate draft my own cubes, and I would say, I don't know. We actually have the data set, I guess. Do we have users in the list of decks we used to generate the map? I'm going to ask Jed after this if he can tell me how many of my drafted decks are in the database, because I would bet on average I do like 30 to 40 a week.
Wow.
Probably.
Okay.
Like if I'm deploying some code, waiting for my tests to run, do a little test draft. Yeah, just finish lunch while I'm, still eating my last little bit, do a little test draft.
Upgrading dependencies, bundle install.
Yeah, there's always little moments during the day. So I did, in fact, ask Jet after the recording if he had this data, and we did, in fact, have it. And I'm here to report that in the data set that we use to build the cube map, which importantly filters out any hidden cubes or private cubes, which some of my drafts would be on from some of my own cube projects that are not available to the public. In that data set, I have drafted 2,428 decks on Cube Cobra, and Anthony has drafted 182. So a little bit less than my estimate of 30 to 40 a week, given how long I've been on Cube Cobra, but there's definitely been periods where I've not been designing something actively and therefore drafting much less. So yeah, suffice it to say, I use the feature quite a bit. Part of it is just idle play, right? Like, it's just kind of fun to click through, draft a deck, see how it goes. I do use it as a pretty substantial cube design tool, though. I mentioned on our last episode that I think the best use for this tool, given that the bots are never perfect and, there's oftentimes in any cube list cards that are recontextualized enough that they are the best cards in this cube that for some reason the bots don't rate very highly because they're more generically tuned. And so if you're just trying to draft what's open, you will, in most cubes, I think, end up drafting kind of the same deck over and over again. And you might trick yourself into thinking this deck is too strong, but actually it's just that the bots don't draft that deck for whatever reason. So I don't think there's a lot of value into going into a draft just trying to draft what's open and draft for real. I think there's a ton of value, though, in going in and forcing. Either saying, before I even see pack one, pick one, I'm going to force this archetype to see how it feels. And I cannot tell you how much, despite all of my overthinking about a cube design list, once you are in a pack and you're looking at the options for your deck, how different cards feel, where it's okay, this card made sense to me when I was looking at the cube list.
Oh, this card is sick. This is going to be the best card for this archetype. And then you're like, there's a fetch land in this pack. I'm just going to take that.
No, not even that. It's more like the mid-pack stuff where it's okay, here's the gold card. I literally put in the cube before the deck I'm drafting, but these two monocolored cards are actually just, I should take that.
Yeah.
If I'm drafting this deck as effectively as I can, I should just take that. That tells you a lot about things. Or just looking how your curve is laying out and just realizing that even though the curve of the cube might be where you want it to be, it turns out that the most appealing threats for this particular deck, the curve isn't as distributed as you might like, and so you end up kind of off curve if you force that deck 3 times back to back. I think you can learn a lot from effectively forcing drafts on Cube Cobra. And like I said, either before pack one, pick one, just decide you're going to force a certain deck, or a lot of times I'll go in and based on my pack one, pick one, then I'll force from there. So I'll pick something from the first pack that's a little bit of a roll, and maybe I'll take what I think is the best card, or maybe I'll see a card I'm inspired to take pack one, pick one, and then I'll just draft from that point. This is not what this episode is about, but I'll say I think my most desired feature on Cube Cobra, for this reason, given that this is the feature I use the most, I would love the ability to essentially seed a card into the first pack of the draft, so that I can basically say, I'm going to take this pack one, pick one.
That's a very niche feature. I don't see that getting
I don't think it's going to happen. I mean, to be fair, there are hundreds of features on the site that I think are more niche in the sense that I find them completely not useful at all for cube design. But that one I would find very useful. But that's just my own usage of a tool.
I mean, you could just draft pretending like you have that pack one, pick one.
I do that sometimes. I'll just like pretend I have Mishra's Workshop and draft from there.
Sometimes just do that as a daydream, just like, what if I had Mishra's Workshop?
So what aspects of the many features on Cube Cobra do you actually use when designing your own lists?
For me, it's mostly, obviously just the list management. I use the filtering a lot to be able to take a cube and be like, okay, well, this card says it cares about goblins. How many goblins do I actually have in this cube? Stuff like that. I do think the overviews, so in addition to managing the list, every cube has an overview page where you can just write whatever you want about what the cube is all about. So here's the archetypes I'm trying to support. Here's the themes that I really enjoy and think will work here. And that's useful just to sort of, I think more than anything, really establish your goals. So say, these are the kinds of gameplay that I'm going for in this cube, so that when I send it to somebody else, they have a sense of what they're actually giving feedback on. I think the history feature is also very useful, especially if you're playing regularly with local cubes, being able to see that, oh, these 10 cards were taken out and these 10 cards were put in, can give you a sense of what might have changed draft to draft. And again, that's the kind of thing that you don't necessarily care about when you're talking about a deck that I'm bringing to a GP. It's like, I just want the best version of the deck, but for cubes, I think that can be especially useful.
But I mean, I'm talking about specifically as a cube designer. Like, yeah, as a player, it can be helpful to look back over the history. I mean, it's obviously nice to, obviously, like, the essential core feature is that it maintains your list over time and you can, see the changes over time. Like, that is essential.
I like those essentials. Sticking to the essentials.
So you don't use a whole lot of other features is what it sounds like.
Yeah, that's fair.
The other thing I use all the time is the maybe board. I know that a lot of people are not.
I got spreadsheets for that.
I like having it all in one place. So the maybe board for a cube that is well established. So for example, for like my Bun Magic cube, my primary cube has been around for 7 years at this point and has been aggressively tuned in that time. That maybe board is very small. It's pretty much just cards that I have thought idly at some point it'd be nice if I could squeeze this in here someday. I'll put it over there. If there's a card that I haven't yet acquired but I want to acquire for the cube, I'll put it in the maybe board. And for cubes that are still in the process of being designed, oftentimes for me, the maybe board is substantially larger than the cube itself. It's like, this is my big pile of cards I've been considering, so that if I get a good reason to cut one of these cards that's in the cube or a package of cards that's in the cube because I've slightly changed my design goals or slightly changed how I plan to realize my design goals, I have that sort of pool of cards to pull from immediately that I've already kind of pre-selected as possibly making sense in the cube. I also use the tagging feature selectively.
Ooh, yeah. I use that for a couple cubes that have like very specific ways that they're being drafted, especially because it's nice to be able to group cards into, this is the separate module that's going to get used a little bit differently.
Yeah, I use it a lot more for design than for anything else. Like, I don't particularly care to communicate my tags to players mostly. Like, you can color them if you want, which means that visually someone can just arrive at the cube and see very clearly color-coded, what belongs to what tag. I most use it for me, though, for design. So, for example, the 100 Ornithopters cube, I have every card in the sideboard that does any kind of card advantage or card selection tagged and colored so that I can see when I'm looking at the maybe board what those sets of cards are, because that's a category of cards I have multiple times come back to and tried to bolster over and over again in that cube. Once they're in the main cube, I take the tag off. I don't want to see it anymore. I don't want it to be covered in the actual main cube list. I don't want to draw attention to it. I want it just to sort of match with like other cards, but I find it helpful there to tag those cards in that context so that I can inform my design process. Similarly, in my simple, or my cube focused on elegance, sacred geometry, there I care about a lot of things I might not normally care about, and so I have gone out of my way to tag those things. So I have tags there for cards that I think are wordy. I run some wordy cards. Some wordy cards
wordy,
belong.
Not in the sense of the mechanic wordy. You just mean generally they're not quite to your taste and having too many words.
Wordy?
Oh, never mind.
No, just have a lot of words on them. I also have cards tagged that are not available in the modern frame, because eventually I want that cube to be all modern frame. I'm looking at you, Miscalculation and Complicate. I need you both in modern frames. They don't exist. I also have cards tagged that don't have quite the right Oracle text. Now, I'm pretty staunchly avoiding anything with, like, functionally wrong Oracle text. So the most common example of this is burn spells that say target creature or player that now would say any target. I just am trying really hard to avoid those. But there's a lot of other cases where the Oracle text doesn't quite exactly match the text on the card, and I want to be conscious of that. Like, for example, even just a bunch of cards that say enter the battlefield now just is enters, right? Or like add to your mana pool, which is now just adds. I have tags for all those things that don't quite match there, and so oftentimes I'll use that as a tiebreaker if I'm making a change where it's like, well, I'm kind of on the fence about cutting one of these two cards. This one happens to have the wrong Oracle text, so I guess I'm just going to cut this one instead and stick with the one that has correct Oracle text. So I use that as a design tool to like glance at my list and see how am I doing on the number of wordy cards, how am I doing on the number of cards that have the incorrect Oracle text, and just manage that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Basically, like sometimes there are things baked into the cards, like you can search for all the things that reference Goblin. You can't necessarily search for some of those much more nuanced things, but it's 300, 500 cards. It might be worth it to go in and tag those things so you can get that same perspective on some of those more abstract concepts.
Precisely.
There is also just a long tail, like you mentioned, of smaller features that are useful every once in a while, so you can also get tables and charts of all the different, pick any aspect of cards in your cube, the mana cost, the color, and any other, and graph it so you can get a sense of curve and things like that. I honestly often find just looking at sort of the different layouts and using the filters to be a little bit more useful, because then I can think, oh, well, it seems a little bit heavy on black 2-drops, but actually there's a couple here that are modal in a way that it makes sense, so I don't end up using those graphs as much as possible, but if that works for you, they're definitely there. There's also a recommender if you want just other suggestions of cards based on similarity to cards that are used together in other cubes. Honestly, maybe the best one in sort of the deep well of the analysis tab is the tokens. I do use that a lot to get the tokens.
That's a good page, actually.
So specifically, it tells you every token you need and which cards make it, which is helpful then to say like, oh, okay, well I need, my Thopters for Whirler Rogue, so let me make sure I get 2 of those because it's gonna always come in with 2.
Yeah, the tokens page is great. That's an essential page. We love that one.
If I'm honest, the other feature that I do use a lot is the API, which is not going to be relevant to most people, but maybe it's worth mentioning that you can just
Is it even publicly documented? Is that a thing?
It's public.
Does Gwen want us telling the entire podcast there's an API?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
The source code's public.
Okay.
Yeah, and I've also, if you are writing specifically JavaScript, written some code that'll give you, or I should say, if you're writing TypeScript, giving you some code that'll also tell you the structure of that data, which will make it a little bit easier to work with. And yeah, I mean, if you are somebody that's going to write code to mash up lists of cards, it's definitely super useful to have it.
Yeah, so if you're new to cube design, I would say just
start with it.
Just use Cube Cobra because it's going to display the list in a way that makes a lot more sense. And the first thing I would play with beyond just putting the list into a sensible format is the test drafts. Once you have a functional 360 cards, or however many you want to draft, whatever your baseline is, then you can go in there and configure that draft. There's even different kinds of draft options on Cube Cobra, so you can change pack size, you can even do a grid draft. I will actually, we've given the advice to cube designers to just, do whatever they can to get to the point where they're actually drafting their cube and playing, right? Like, don't be too precious about it. Just put cards in there, like, get it to a point you can actually play it, iterate from there. I have that same mentality with my own completely theoretical cube design lists where I try to get them to the point where they are draftable 360 as quickly as possible so that I can start having this sort of feedback loop with myself of test drafting and seeing how the cards feel, seeing how the archetypes feel, and then going back and editing and doing it again. Those are definitely the 2 big ones. Scryfall, Cube Cobra. What is your next most important design tool for cube design?
I think the next ones, well, maybe we should just say spreadsheets. Spreadsheets are very useful. I use Google Sheets a lot for basic stuff like I'm updating a list and I want to keep track of which cards I've already found or which cards I've ordered or stuff that I need to look for and I want to note that it was, in this other deck that I left over there, so I need to go find it from that box.
All those features are on Cube Cobra.
You can definitely,
There's a status, there's a notes
There is a status, there is notes, but sometimes I just like a good spreadsheet. Going back to that API.
Is that your genuine recommendation for somebody who's like new to cube design? You think they should?
It's my recommendation if you are very comfortable using spreadsheets. Like if that's the way they're used to using data,
I think those people don't need to be recommended. If you are a spreadsheet person, you're a spreadsheet person.
Okay, then let me just recommend this. If you're a spreadsheet person, I did also write a integration for Google Sheets, so you can just put in the URL to the cube and it'll just pull in the whole list and you can actually configure what attributes you want from the card. So if you really want to have the card name but also the type so you know where to find it in your collection or whatever, that's a pretty cool way to be able to use it.
Call that the Parnellifier.
Look, spreadsheets are still good. Like
I love spreadsheets.
Abstract tools work well.
You're preaching to the choir. I just don't know if in our tools for introductory cube design episode, we should be telling people to also use
okay, so
API
Scryfall is too basic and spreadsheets is too niche. What's your next most used tools?
My next most used tool is actually MTG Top 8. This is the de facto archive of competitive deck lists from across every constructed format for as far back as I believe we have data. I know for a long time MTGO would do deck list dumps where they would provide deck lists at the end of the week for challenges or something. I don't know the terminology, but we used to get deck lists from MTGO. My understanding is we don't anymore. We do, but it's in a format that's not useful. Also, you have to register your deck list to compete in almost any event, and a lot of those registrations make their way to MTG Top 8. I use this as a design tool for a couple of very specific purposes. One, if I have a card I know I want to support in my cube, I will look it up on MTG Top 8 and look at deck lists that include this card and have, especially, they include 4 copies of that card, and you can search by number of copies as well, and find decks that have made that card successful in Constructed. Obviously, I don't think you can directly take things from Constructed and apply them to Limited, but I have found countless cards for cubes in exactly this method of just show me a deck that has played this card competitively in Constructed and then take inspiration from that deck. This was also huge for me when I was making the Degenerate Micro Cube, because that is a cube whose archetypes mimic something closer to like Constructed Vintage, which is a format I knew nothing about. I spent a lot of time on the MTG Top 8 page for just top cards in Vintage. Just show me them in order. Let me look at the top 200 cards and at least understand what role each of them plays and why they might be prevalent in the format. I think it's a really helpful way to just get a different perspective on cards that might matter alongside other cards, right? The same way you might use the recommender to sort of shotgun style give you a bunch of cards to think about for your cube. You can also use this to give you a lot of cards to think about for your cube.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, and Cube is an interesting challenge because it is so flexible and you can really make it whatever you want it to be, but that means what you want it to be can come from lots of different sources, whether that's being inspired by constructed formats or being inspired by some other aspect of Magic. I think it's worth mentioning EDHREC here as well, which is a similar tool for showing you cards that are related to other cards through the data of commander decks, and you know, if you are interested in a certain card and you're just looking for, again, a new perspective on what that card gets played with, plug it into EDHREC and you can see a bunch of cards that might follow sort of the same synergies.
Yeah, I will say that I go to EDHREC when I have a specific legend I want to support. I find it less useful if it's like, oh, show me cards that are played alongside Lightning Bolt or whatever. But
I think it's useful if you have a really explicit theme that you want to support, like I want to learn about equipments and what things like really make equipment work. That's the kind of thing that you're going to be able to find a lot of options there.
Yeah, or also just, the blunt thing is you have this legend in your cube, you want it to be good. All right, well, look up all the cards that are played in its namesake commander deck and get inspired. So yeah, for me, I think it goes Cube Cobra and Scryfall, and then MTG Top 8 is probably my next most visited cube design tool. What else you got?
I think the next things that I use, honestly, are some of the tools that we've made at Lucky Paper. Is that a good thing to go through? So we talked about...
Don't be shy. We don't make any money off of this. It only costs us money if you use them. So
that's true.
This is not shallow self-promotion. This is just Anthony made the thing because he wanted it to exist.
So as you mentioned at the top of the show, I just deal with a bunch of lists of cards a lot of the time, and I think a big part of that is just knowing how to get lists of cards from one place to another. So I mentioned I love using Scryfall just to build that initial list and then getting it over to Cube Cobra, and Cube Cobra is pretty flexible about its import process, but you can basically upload a CSV of cards. But maybe you care about the specific version, or you care about some other aspect of it. You want to like import your tags as well. You can do that, you just have to get a properly formatted CSV. So one of the things that I made, I guess we're just gonna call it the list formatter, because MTG Data Science told us to do this. But it's just, you got a list of cards in one place and you want it to go somewhere else in a different format, it'll help you do that. So specifically, you can just take the URL from your list on Scryfall, paste that in, and select CSV and choose the Cube Cobra format and export it there. Or, the initial impetus for making this tool actually was just so often I just wanted to do a search and then get that text list of cards to put it somewhere else. So like, here's my list, I want to add one of every Shockland to it. So you can also start with a Scryfall search and type in is Shockland and then copy that list of cards and put it wherever it needs to go. It also does a couple things with images, and it is sort of general purpose, the Swiss Army knife for if you have cards in one place and you need to format them for another place, it can hopefully let you do that.
If you find yourself doing anything tedious with a list of Magic cards, chances are the list formatter can make your life easier.
I also recently built another small tool, which we're calling the List Differ, which just, accepts all the same inputs as the list formatter, but just compares two lists. So it gives you what are the cards that are unique in each half, and what are the cards that are shared. This is actually something you can also do directly on Cube Cobra and a lot of other sites, but the advantage here is you can just paste in two lists from anywhere, and it also handles if you have multiples of cards. So if you have like 2x Lightning Bolt in one list and 1x Lightning Bolt in the other, it'll show you just one in one place and then one that is an intersection. Again, this is just something that I feel like comes up all the time, that it's like, I need to know what cards I need to order between this version of my cube and this other one, or I just want to look at two cubes and understand what's unique about them. You can just plug them in there. So that's the thing that I end up using pretty frequently. And in the past might go to, just doing some programming, but now I've put it in a way that you don't need to know JavaScript.
Yeah, great tool for sure.
Also, more on the side of discovery, the cube map is one of the first projects that we did at Lucky Paper, and what this does is it takes all of the cubes on Cube Cobra, and we also have a similar thing for all of the decks on EDHREC as well, but it takes all of those lists and organizes them based on the cards they contain, so it tries to put the things that are most similar closer together, and it turns into a really, really interesting map that sort of shows you, well, here's all the old school cubes on this one little island, here's all the sort of traditional vintage cubes that are following the MTGO vintage cube, that sort of template, yeah. But then a bunch of other little themes emerge that you wouldn't have necessarily expected. Like there's a little island for any given set or plane. There's, here's Innistrad Island, here's Khans of Tarkir Island, and then here's all the mono green cubes, and then here's the cubes that have all the uncards, and all these themes kind of emerge. So
here's the island of cubes with 100 of the same creature in them.
Exactly. So it's a little bit difficult sometimes to explain sort of what the map actually is and like how it gets generated, but if you ever just find yourself wanting to explore a particular theme and get some inspiration, you want to look at other people's lists that are built around a certain theme, it's a great tool just to be able to explore the cubes, because you can search on Cube Cobra, but unless somebody's titled or tagged their cube in a useful way, you're not necessarily going to be able to find it.
Yeah, I think it's a tool that is hard to explain the very practical use case for. It's not like you're going to go on there, you're going to click 3 buttons, and you're going to have new cards to look at necessarily. I think the best thing to do with it, like you said, is just discovery, just explore, just make yourself more aware of the variety and breadth of cubes that are in the space.
It really does highlight that variety and make it visual.
Yeah, and I think the next most useful thing is pretty much no matter what you're doing, for the most part, aside from some of the more weird out there cube designs, I would bet there's a couple other designers that are exploring a very similar space to you, and this is the best way to find them, to find the cubes on Cube Cobra that are just most similar to your own cube. So we update the data every couple weeks, every month or so, and your cube has to be marked as public in order to be included on the map. So if your cube has been on Cube Cobra and has been public for more than a month or whatever, it'll be on the cube map, and you can go look it up and find your nearest neighbors and just see what they've done differently from you. It might be a great way to just see what similar cubes are doing slightly differently.
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess I should say there is one other way that your cube might not be on the cube map. If your cube is a copy of another cube on Cube Cobra, which will almost always be your own cube, or if somebody's cloned your cube and you haven't made any changes since then, we don't show copies on the map. So if you look up your cube by your ID and you don't find it, that's the other reason it might not be on there, is because it's a copy of another one. And right now I think we're choosing one at random because we don't have dates right now we don't have creation dates for cubes, and we're working on getting that from Gwen again so that we can go back to always showing the oldest cube if there are copies of it on Cube Cobra.
So those are just a couple things that I've literally made just to make my own Magic hobby more easier and cut down on repetitive tasks, but it's also just really rewarding when other people mention, this saved me a bunch of time. I feel a warm, fuzzy feeling, so check those out.
I've got 2 other things here, Anthony. I don't use this one that often, but when I do, I find it to be uniquely useful, and that is commanderspellbook.com.
Oh, that's interesting, yeah.
This is a database of Commander combos. They're only Commander combos in the sense that they're most frequently played in Commander. Obviously, you can play a lot of them in a lot of formats. And at time of recording, there are over 36,000 combos documented on this website. And they're documented in a pretty thorough way. They include all the cards that are involved in the combo, and they also include what the output of the combo is, whether it is infinite damage, infinite mana, infinite storm, whatever the output is included, and you can also search by all those factors. But I think the most useful feature for this for cube designers is you can actually punch in a list of cards as long as you want, a whole cube, and have this thing spit out all of the combos in the database that are entirely contained within your cube, which I actually most often use to make sure that there aren't any combos I have missed, because I often don't want these combos to be a thing, or I want them to be at least, 4 or 5 cards or something before you're doing anything infinitely, and I often will look things up in here just to make sure that I haven't, I accidentally forgot that actually Seeker of Skybreak does go infinite with Kiki Jiki Mirror Breaker. That was very briefly in the Neoclassical Cube, where I intend to run a value Kiki Jiki, but I accidentally forgot that you can go infinite with Seeker of Skybreak. You just have to do it on your opponent's end step Anyway.
I believe it'll also tell you combos that you are very close to completing as well, correct? So if you're interested in putting more combos into your list, paste your list in and it'll say like, oh, just add this one card and then you have this going on.
Yeah, just add Phyrexian Altar. Turns out that turns a lot of things into a combo.
That makes sense.
I have used this for a couple cubes in the past to specifically find cards to help build out a combo suite further. I've used it a little bit with 100 Ornithopters, though that context is so specific that a lot of the combos, as far as I know, I haven't actually dug deep into the advanced search page, but I don't think you can say, make sure it doesn't include any... Oh, it does not contain the phrase. Looks like I could exclude creatures entirely from... I got to play with the advanced search on commander-spellbook.com. Maybe it would actually be really helpful for the Ornithopters cube. What I found it more useful, though, is I actually have... I've never talked about this list, but I have like a 4-player cube I designed that's like a very dedicated combo cube. Kind of most heavily inspired, I think, by...
I don't know if that sounds fun.
Well, I mean, it depends on the kind of combo. I actually think you would like it, believe it or not. It's mostly heavily inspired by Caleb Gannon's Powered Synergy cube, but really much more focused on the aspects of that cube I was interested in. But that was a place where I have a lot of 3 to 4 card combos across a lot of different colors. And I used Commander Spellbook extensively there to figure out, like, okay, what exactly goes infinite with these cards again, and which of these is flexible enough that it can actually justify inclusion. And it can be really helpful if you are explicitly trying to cultivate a combo-focused environment to just give you suggestions for more pieces you can put in there to make that work.
Honestly, that's also pretty useful as a cube host, just to know what the combos are. So if somebody ends up doing some weird combo, you can know how they work. It can be kind of disruptive to a cube draft when somebody's like, oh, I did this thing, and their opponent's like, does that really work that way? This doesn't make any sense. So just understanding your own environment a little bit better, and I think this is a great way to do that, can help you be a better host for your cube drafts.
Then my last tool, this isn't actually a cube design tool, but we're talking about so many other things, I feel like I got to mention it. I use sealeddeck.tech whenever I'm doing a rotisserie draft. This is a website that's designed to help you build a sealed pool. I import the entire cube list as my pool, and then I will take all the cards I'm not considering, and they have a like hide mode where you can basically put them in a third bucket. So you then have your sideboard, your main board, and the hidden bucket. Basically, like, once I know what I'm drafting, I'll hide all the cards I know I'm never taking in the rotisserie draft, and I'll put every card I'm considering possibly taking in the rotisserie draft in the sideboard, usually in order by what I want to pick next, and then the actual deck down below just actually is the cards I've successfully already picked. Not a cube design tool, just as a tool as a player, but this really helped level up my rotisserie drafting. I think the first couple roto drafts I did, we should, I guess, if this is an episode truly for new players, we should mention a rotisserie draft is a face-up draft of a cube where each player takes one pick at a time. Every other player can see what everyone else has picked, and you go through the entire cube until you've all picked a full pool. You can do this in person. Most often it is done asynchronously via Anthony's great rotisserie draft template. So you basically play on Google Sheets where you have a...
Love to play Magic on Google Sheets.
You play on Google Sheets, you have your chat going with the people you're drafting with so you can talk about your picks and everything. And it takes, a week or two to finish the draft usually, and then you get to play. The first couple of these drafts that I did, I just kind of like looked at what I had picked and, tried to imagine what the deck would look like, and found that I frequently made a bunch of drafting mistakes where, like, at the middle of the draft or near the end, I was just taking cards that seemed like the best cards that were still left when actually I should have been taking less powerful but more important role players, or I should have been thinking more about my curve or whatever, or I took way more playables than I needed to before I started taking sideboard cards because you actually only have the 23 cards in the main deck or whatever. So laying it all out in sealeddeck.tech has totally changed how I rotisserie draft for the better, I think.
Yeah, I end up using that a lot for, again, it's like, I want to figure out how pools work so that I can understand the environment better.
Wait, what?
Like, I got a pool, and I want to figure out how I would actually build a deck out of it to see how does it feel.
You're saying you would generate, like, a sealed pool? And
generate a sealed pool, or if I wanted to,
like,
take that draft list, obviously you can also just build the deck on Cube Cobra, but if I want to do something where I can then, I don't know.
Have you ever actually done this?
No. But I use it for building my, rotisserie draft decks.
It's great for rotisserie draft decks.
Okay, great. Do you manage your collection digitally anywhere?
No.
Okay.
I have dreamed of this, and I've actually just come around to the idea that I've been slowly selling off pretty much everything that is not a cube or one of my 2 commander decks, such that everything that is meaningfully in my collection is effectively managed in Cube Cobra or Moxfield for my 2 commander decks, because I don't have a desire to have an additional collection of value.
Yeah, that makes sense. I do have my collection indexed in deckstats.net, which I started using years ago, specifically just because it was the fastest for card entry. It was really quick to be able to take a stack of cards, lay them out, and enter cards. And it is useful to have it there. So again, going back to, I want to, find my cards for a new cube, and I want to know what am I going to find in the box versus what am I going to need to put in my bulk order for TCG Player. Use one of these tools to compare those lists. It's really convenient. Build that spreadsheet for myself.
If you do have your entire collection in a tracker, being able to actually pull that list up to build a cube from sounds incredible.
And you can do that as well.
Like just having access to all the cards are buried in boxes somewhere, so you can make a list and then go find the cards afterwards is very appealing.
Yeah, and a number of other sites also have collection managers. I know Moxfield does, and they're a little bit more sophisticated, definitely a lot more visually appealing than the gray of deck stats.
Hey, I like the gray of deck stats.
If I'm honest, it's gotten harder and harder to continue to manage my collection, and I'm very, very behind because they just print so many versions of cards now. It's just like
it's harder to enter
so slow to enter things that it almost feels
you just have a big
impossible.
Inbox basically.
I literally have a
unsorted
box of unsorted cards that I need to catalog. So yeah, I mean that's I don't know because of that situation that it is just so hard to enter cards and there's so versions. If you care about the version, obviously you might just not. I don't know how valuable it is to do that, but that is something that I do.
It is true that like every rare now basically has like 4 versions at initial release. It's got like the one in the set, it's got the pre-release rare, it's got the
borderless
one,
the one from the commander deck that has a different set symbol.
Yeah.
Oof.
Like even the Surveillance, which have been printed in one set, I was going through and adding those to a list today, and it's like, why are there so many of each of these? This been printed once. Mm-hmm. What are you doing?
There's one that has a little star, and then one that has the year stamp.
Right, the list ones have the stupid the Planeswalker symbol in the bottom left. It's rough out there.
But if you're willing, it is convenient to have your collection cataloged.
Anthony, we're done early. First of all, I'm going to give us permission to end class early, because first of all, it's the holidays.
Mm-hmm.
We got a lot of episodes we got to bank before I travel for the holidays, and we've been doing episodes longer than an hour.
We have.
Consistently for a long time. But I am going to insist we do one thing, which is close with a listener-submitted Pack One, Pick One.
What?
I know, we got to do it. We got time.
Okay.
Does the tool still work you made years ago to
find out.
To generate a list? While you're finding it right now, I will remind our listeners that we have picked our next book for the Lucky Paper Book Club. It is the book Playing Oppression by Mary Flanagan and Michael Jacobson. It is all about the legacy of conquest and empire in colonialist board games. It was recommended to us by a couple people after we finished our last book club book. We'll be recording an episode about this sometime in January, so you've got the whole holidays, the whole new year to read the book if you want to play along at home. We will also be taking hot takes, so if you do read the book and you have a thought about it, feel free to record a little voice memo and send it to mail at luckypaper.co or drop it to me on Discord or social media, and we'll include it in the episode. All right, Anthony, tell us about the cube you randomly selected for our listener-submitted Pack One, Pick One.
We randomly selected the Dandy Cube from Chris Taylor. This is a 400-ish card, unpowered, with custom cards. Ooh, that's cool. I think we should just jump into it.
I just want to make sure, the custom cards are rendering in the sample pack, too. So I guess it's a feature we didn't mention of Cube Cobra. You can actually override the card image for any card in the list. There's no way to add a custom card that will show up as a custom card, by name. But you can add a card at a similar mana cost or whatever, and then override the image for custom cards. Or the main use case for that is if you have altered cards or special cards you want scans of to put in there, you can definitely do that. All right, you picked a hard one because we're going to have to not only read the cards, but also the rules text of all the custom cards, because those are not going to show up on our cards mentioned page. But there's only, it looks like 4? 5? All right, here we go.
Should I pick a different one?
No, it's good. We're going to do it. I guess I should say, if you work for Wizards of the Coast, stop listening to the podcast now. I'm about to read custom card designs. First up is a custom card called Cursory Glance. 1 in a blue for an instant. Counter target spell with mana value 3 or less. Nice and clean. Then we have Spar's Headquarters, Volcanic Island, Prismatic Vista, Galvanic Blast. Then another custom card, Exaltation of Echoed Steps. 1 red mana for a Sorcery Revelation. It's also a 5/5. I'm reading this in real time, folks. Until your next turn, target creature attacks each combat if able and can't block. And then it has a secondary cost, Coalesce. You may cast this from your graveyard for its Coalesce cost. If you do, it becomes a spirit creature as it resolves. Exile if it will be put anywhere other than onto the battlefield. Seems like a kind of take on the adventure mechanic almost, except you have to cast the spell side first, is what Coalesce looks like. So this is basically a goad on a stick that then becomes a 5-mana 5/5 out of the graveyard.
Kind of cool.
Then we got Phyrexian Fleshgorger, Bloodstained Mire, one more custom card, Bringer of Plenty, 1 and a green for a creature human shaman. It's a 2/2. Whenever you draw a card, instead you may choose land or non-land. Reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a card of the chosen kind. Put the card into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. This ability triggers only once each turn. This is basically the enchantment Abundance, stapled to a 2-mana 2/2, but triggered only once each turn. Kind of interesting there. Our last custom card here is Terrible Secrets. It's 5 blue, so 7 mana for an instant. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each type among cards in your graveyard. Look at the top 7 cards of your library, put 2 of them into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. So basically dig through time, but cares about types instead of delving. Then we have Kitsa Otterball Elite, another Prismatic Vista. We already passed one of these, right? Yep, we got multiple Prismatic Vistas here. Osseous, Stick Twister, Nettle Cyst, and Occult Epiphany. I will say, I'm not usually a huge fan of custom cards in Cube, mostly because I think it's really hard to design cards. It's already really hard to design a cube, and you're putting a challenge on top of that of designing custom cards. Most of these I really, really like because they are so simple and so resonant with existing cards, right? The only one that doesn't really match that pattern is this Coalesce Creature Exaltation of Echoed Steppes, but the Cursory Glance, Bringer of Plenty, and Terrible Secrets are all very easy for me to read once and then kind of bookmark that in my head and knowing what it does. So in terms of implementations of custom cards, I'd say good job, Chris. What do you pick, Anthony?
For me, it's between a couple of things. I do agree. I think like Bringer of Plenty especially is a very cool card. It's something that like is good to have down early so you get some card selection. But we do have a triome here. This cube is very land heavy, but there is only one cycle, not even a complete cycle of triomes, and a bunch of fetch lands, which makes me really, really interested in that triome. I think Kitsa is very strong, and the one that is a little bit more swingy maybe is Nettle Cyst, which if you have a ton of artifacts can be a really, really strong sort of win condition. My guess, based on just seeing a Nettle Cyst, is that artifacts are going to be pretty strong, but just glancing through the rest of the list, it doesn't seem like super, super artifact heavy. I'm just going to take that triome. It's maybe a little bit of an unexciting pick, but I think especially with all these custom cards, I'm excited to see what else is in these packs coming forward, and I'd really be happy to have that very good mana fixing to be able to play them.
Well, I'll tell you what I'm going to pick. Think about what you would pick if I banned you from picking a land, because I'm going to ask you that follow-up question.
Okay.
I'm taking the Bloodstained Mire here, and I think the decision between a fetch land and a triome is a very interesting one. If I was coming into this draft with the preconception that I think the aforementioned 5-color good stuff deck, the kind of deck we talked about with Jen on the show last week, if I was coming in expecting that deck to be strong or wanting to sort of adhere to that strategy, I'm taking the Triome first for sure, because I'm much more likely to find fetch lands to go get that Triome in the future picks in the draft than I am to find more Triomes, because, as you said, they are fewer and further between, and they're really valuable to have. If I am coming in staying open and just expecting that maybe I'll be a 2-color deck, maybe I'll be a 3-color deck, there's a small chance I'll be a greedier deck, there I'm taking the more open pick of just Bloodstained Mire, because that just goes in a lot more decks and is very flexible.
But there are 3 of each fetch land in this cubes, and only 5 total triomes, so I feel like regardless, that triome is still really, really strong, because it just means that then whatever fetch lands I can pick up in the future end up becoming much more powerful.
I mean, the Triome is strong. To be clear, this is a 450-some card cube, so we're not going to see all of it. The fact that there is 3 copies of each fetch land doesn't really make me value them any less. Even though 9 of the fetch lands can get this card? Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that card is only playable in your deck if you're playing some combination of Bant. If you take that and then get past a crazy good black and red cards.
Is 5 colors a combination of Bant?
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Okay.
If I'm coming into this expecting to play 4 or 5 colors, then for sure I'm just taking the Triome. If I'm coming into this more open-minded, expecting that I might be a good 2-color deck or whatever, then I'm taking the fetch land. There are also duels here, so I saw the Volcanic Island in the pack. I don't have to get a Triome to have a fetchable card. So that's my pick if I'm allowed to take a land, unless, like I said, I'm coming in with the idea that I'm going to be forcing some greedy, soupy deck. If I ban you from taking a land, Anthony, what's your pick?
I'm going to take Kitsa then. I mean, just looking at this pack and a very quick glance over the rest of the list, it looks like, not that you need a ton of support for Kitsa, but it's going to There's going to be a lot of spell stuff to trigger that prowess. Plus, it's just a very cheap card, which I'm always happy to get that at any point in the draft.
I think Kitsa is my pick on power level, but I'm going to take the Bringer of Plenty here, this cool Abundance Bear, just because I want to see what it's like. It's a cool custom card that I'd be excited to play with.
I'm glad that they have a specific set symbol on the custom cards, because otherwise I would have had no idea if this was a real card or not.
Yeah, that's pretty important. The custom card set symbol is pretty essential. All right, Chris, thank you for sending in your cube. I'm not going to invite people to send in their cubes for the listener submitted Pack One Pick One because we basically never do it anymore. But every once in a while we have extra time, and then we'll sneak one in there. I already mentioned the book club. Anything else we should say before we wrap up, Anthony?
I'm just curious how many cubes we have in this list.
It's a number that's going to make me feel bad.
It's a lot of cubes.
How many?
186.
That's actually,
185 now.
That's actually many
And
fewer than I expected.
Our random picking algorithm does weight the cubes that have been in the list that were submitted earlier higher. So everybody's got a chance, but some people have a better chance.
All right, well, that's it for this episode of Lucky Paper Radio. We are pre-recording a bunch of episodes to be released over the holidays and New Year, so look forward to those coming out in the next couple weeks. And then on to 2025, Anthony. Multiple times at the end of this year, I have thought it was 2023, and I've been like, can't wait for 2024. That'll be a fun year. And
I have news for you.
Really speaks to how old and non-functional my brain is becoming.
Same. I almost forgot we were recording a podcast today.
Not almost, you did. It's okay.
I almost did, and then I fully did.
I almost did, then I did, then I was reminded by you, and then I didn't anymore.
That's what happened.
All of our music is produced by DJ James Nasty. All the Magic cards are produced by Wizards of the Coast. This podcast is produced by thinking really hard about Magic cards and speaking to microphones about it. If we got any card text wrong on this episode, that was intentional to bait engagement. Anthony, thank you for the gift of friendship and for the gift of Cube.
Thank you for talking about all these websites with me. It was good.
You know, I was about to say I like talking about websites. I don't, but we got there.
It's been a long day of websites for us.
We made it work for us.